website, how much contrast is there. And you could think about it that way. But I enjoy those, and there are websites where you can get this information. In industry, people pay a lot of money for this. So if you're a fashion designer, you have to subscribe to these things. And the people who do this make a living from making color stories. But there are some free websites, like Pantone is a big color company. And Pantone makes industry standard colors. So you can say match Pantone color XXXX. And whether it's in graphic design or fabric or carpeting, people will match that color. And Pantone always has a color of the year. In 2012, it was Tangerine Tango. In 2013, it's Emerald. So you get that chrome green out because it's very green. Emerald. And there are also some websites from the paint manufacturers, and I have some of these listed on the blog post about this. But some of the paint manufacturers, one of them has a personality quiz that you can take to help you identify your palette, which is kind of fun. And there's a color picker website where you can upload a picture and it gives you a palette from that picture. So it's really interesting, and it's not 100%, it's a little wonky because I've taken images of my work just to see what it says to the palette. And it's also very interesting when you have relative amounts and colors next to each other to see those colors isolated as color chips. They always look pretty different. And I think it's just an interesting exercise in trying to understand color, understanding how you perceive color and how you enjoy color and how you can take that into your work and show other people things by your use of color, contrast, value, all those kind of things. So I've got a green foot, I've got warm fruit, I've got cool leaves, and I decided that in terms of color choices for the ground, if I make warm color, I'll lose the fruit. There won't be much contrast in the warm fruit. So if I made the background red, although my fruit is yellow and orange primarily, I think, the fruit might show, but it won't be as prominent as if I had a cooler background. I have made a number of pieces that have gray as a background. Gray is like the non-choice. Gray is in the middle. It's not warm. It's not cool. It's a medium value. But gray has emotional tone to it. Gray is kind of reserved. And if I wanted to be fun, playful, tropical, gray would not be the color choice. So it all depends on your intent in the work. If I use a cooler color, the blues are going to pop. There's going to be maybe a little less contrast with the leaves. But my leaves are green toward yellow. They're avocado and chartreuse. So if I use a bluish color like turquoise, I think I'm still going to get some pop from the yellow-green color in the leaves. I'll get more pop from the fruit. That'll work out. And so I think turquoise is not a bad choice. So,
do you generally decide the color, the background color at this point, or do you decide
it would be good for me. Some days I do decide up front, like, I love this red color. I've used gallons of this red color. And some days I just feel the need to do red, and then I back up from that. But a lot of times I decide on mood for the motifs, and then I sort of paint myself into a corner and think, what's going to go with that? Oh my goodness, I've really created a problem. It would be better if I decided up front.
Well, I'm glad you
I don't always have to.
I was told that, you should decide what glaze, how you glaze it as you throw it, which I never, ever do.
Well, the flip side of that, though, if you're someone who works intuitively, you have to make a lot more because you're going to have to throw at least half of it away. And there are times when planning saves you from error. On the other hand, if you're a free spirit, you just live with the fact that you're going to learn a lot of really interesting things on the way. And although you have learned a lot, half of the work is going to go in the trash. That's the way it goes. A lot of people, like Peter Volkus, was very productive, and he could fill the studio in an afternoon, and then he'd throw a lot of that away. He wouldn't save all of it. I take a long time and I work pretty slowly, so the idea of throwing half of it away deliberately kind of makes me cringe. But I've had a lot of problems with that gassing issue that I was talking about last night in my play. And I've lost a lot of work in the past couple of years. So in essence, I probably lost at least a third of what I made. It's getting a little better. I've still got to do some testing this summer about materials. I've been auditioning some new clay bodies, and they seem to be working a little better. I would like to have what I want in clay mixed up, but I'm not sure I know what the evil ingredient is right yet.
Is the gassing out causing craters or pinholes, or what is
It's
it?
causing white dotting and some dimpling. And if you refire, it gets worse. So I can't, it's not like I could possibly bisque high enough to get past it, because it continues past my glaze temperature.
And you can't go lower either?
Well, lower won't solve the problem. They're still dotting even lower. It starts gassing low and it gasses up to a higher temperature.
And what's your biscuit temperature?
I'm bisquing with an 05 and it's considerable. And that's giving me like an 06 visual on the kiln shell.
Even with that little bit of hawthorn in my body, I have to bisque to 1945. If I don't bisque that high, I'll get gassing with just 5 pounds of hawthorn.
And if I bisque that high, there's no glazing.
Right.
I just couldn't get glazed at 6, because I'm only firing to about 1950, 1960. So, okay, so I've thinned this down a little bit, and I'm working back and forth. I'll show you on the outside when I'm doing that, but I need to go back and forth and kind of cross-hatch this so that I can get the color more even, because it's not very even to start with. And this turquoise is a commercial color, and it seems a little overgummed to me, and it seems a little hard to get it on evenly. It slides around a lot. They've changed their colors a couple of times, and I think that most of them were overgummed before they quit making them. So I have mixed emotions about them quitting, because I probably would be happier if I did the research and mixed my own. And I'm looking for something commercial just because it's easier when I go to a workshop to order that stuff and they have it there for me for people to use. But I think in my own studio I'm probably going to go to mixing my own, just so they won't leave me again.
They'll change ingredients.
Well, the ingredients will change, but not as much as a manufacturer saying, we're not making any of that anymore. So.
You said your terrace stitch was red art?
Mm-hmm.
Is the main clay in your body also red art?
Yes. I've tried, there's a Texas clay called Ranger Red.
Yeah.
There's a really nice classic red clay. Unfortunately, it has little black spit out periodically, and that made it unsuitable. I've tried Newman's Red, which is another Western earthenware clay, and Newman's Red is a brick clay, and they don't seem to care very much about maintaining a regular consistency to it. So some batches would be really great, and other batches would have spit outs and chunks, and it wasn't very good. I've talked to actually the people at Highwater have talked to the people who made Lizella in Georgia, and they asked them about whether they'd had the sulfur content checked on the Lizella, and people just laughed. Oh, it's not anything that interested them. Again, there are people using that for applications where it doesn't make any difference, so they can save some of it.
You talk about how you make your terraces.
Okay, terra sigillata literally means earth seal. And what you want to do when you make terra sigillata is you want just the finest particles of clay. And those little fine particles, if you have them deflocculated and they're parallel, are also going to be more susceptible to heat than big particles. So they wind up usually being a little darker and a little more fused than that clay when the particles are not selected for fineness. it would be the difference between trying to cook a whole potato and cooking grated potatoes. When you have something small, there's more surface area and it responds to heat more.
My big pot in there is Sarasota water on it.
And how do you make yours today?
4 by little.
This is another.
I don't have a bowl. I don't have a bowl.
I don't have a ball mill, I don't have a ball. So you can, I have just taken the slot from my bucket when I throw and deflocculated that and let it settle out and siphon it off. But it was another one of those things where I found out I got better results if I weighed and measured. And Pete Pinnell did the homework. And he uses twice as much water as clay by weight. So I usually use 14 pounds of water, 7 pounds of clay, and a teaspoon of soda ash, and mix it up real well and let it settle. And if it's a red clay, I probably let it settle for about 12 hours. 2 teaspoons? A teaspoon of soda ash. A red clay I let set for about 12 hours. A white clay or a ball clay with finer particles, I might let set as much as 24 hours. And then you need to siphon off the fine particles. So you want to get some flexible tubing. And you leave your container in place so that you don't stir it up. And on the outside of your container, you would, it's great if you have a transparent container, but most of the time I don't. So what I would do is figure that I wanted the top 2/3 once it's settled, and I would measure the top 2/3 of the way down on my tubing, and I'd put a little mark there. And then the easiest way to siphon is to go fill your tube with water and put your thumb over either end, and you put one end into the liquid to the level that you've marked, and the other end lower into a bucket on the floor, and then release the end, and siphon off the top 2/3. I have tried sucking on the tube and always think that I'm going to be faster than I am. I'm not that fast. I've got a mouthful of clay and it's really gritty. So I now fill the tube with water and do it that way, but it works.
Do you have to evaporate off some water, or is it ready to use at that point?
It's pretty much ready to use at that point.
So doesn't it just look like water?
It looks thin. It's really thin. It looks like skim milk. It's really thin. I mean, it doesn't look like, in terms of color, it doesn't look like water, no. And it's kind of pearly, especially with a red clay, it's kind of pearly when you stir it up. It's really interesting.
Have you ever figured out what to do with stuff you don't use?
Throw it in the trash. Do not put it back in your clay. It will flocculate your clay and make you sad.
Oh. I just haven't
Throw it away. It's coarse clay particles and they're deflocculated. When you have clay that's deflocculated and the particles are lined up parallel to each other, you have this problem when it starts to dry. And I'll draw you a little picture. Okay, while I'm putting the background on, if I want the background color to be even, I really need to work over one area, not so much band it, but I need to go back and forth while it's still damp and cross hatch to get the color to sit down and be even. And you really want to make sure that you have enough color at this consistency before you do it, because you'll be unhappy if you run out in the middle. Never the same twice.
You use a mixer when you're mixing that sausage?
No, I usually just use a whisk and mix the piping. It would be good if you had a mixer. That'd be good. A lot of people do ball mill their sigillata, and light ball milling will increase your yield. Intense ball milling will destroy the terracig because you break up the little plate-like particles into smithereens, and then they don't align well, and you don't get any overlapping, and you lose some of that shininess in the finished product. So if I were ball milling, I would probably, a ball mill is a device for wet grinding. It's a porcelain jar that has a tight-fitting lid, and it has porcelain balls in it. And you fill it with your glaze mix and sit it sideways on rollers, so it tumbles, and those porcelain balls crash together, and help brine any liquid that's in there. People who do gemstone polishing use a similar setup. It's not necessary to ball mill your terrace big. I've made perfectly adequate terrace gelato without it. You can get sometimes slightly shinier and slightly higher yield from ball mill. I don't have a ball mill. I've often thought what I should do is take a big plastic mayonnaise jar, make some porcelain balls, and throw it in the back of the car for a week or two and just let it roll around. And see what that does. It'd be good, don't you think? Yeah. The back way of doing those things. Okay, so I've got the background put on. And now I need to clean off the little dots of color. The wax will burn away and those little dots of color will stay right where they are. So unless I'm content with those little dots of color being all over my motifs, I need to clean them off. There was a bowl that I saw, this is the Mallorca artist named Terry Cleaver. She made a bowl with goldfish in the bottom and put a blue background on. And the dots, she left the dots and they kind of look like bubbles. So in that case, they look pretty good. Most of the time, if I have splotches on my leaves, they look like my plants are sick. So I tend to want to clean off the dots. And I was mentioning, if I have something that's really thin now, like if there's a stem that I want to clean off, and it's really thin, I might wax the background next to that stem on either side so that I don't smear the background while I'm sponging. These motifs are pretty big, so I don't think I'm going to have much trouble. Every now and then I've gotten a notion, and there are times where I've put a brown color on and then taken a toothbrush and spattered color on top of it, so it was sort of like 50s linoleum. And when you have that spatter design, you really don't want to sponge that and smear your dots from the spatter. So for something like that, I would probably wax around the edges of the motif on the background to make sure that I didn't smear it. So normally I use this white base glaze, and I tend to like the glaze that I mix up because it's made for dipping. You can try some of the commercial glazes. They're usually gummed for brushing. So they've added CNC gum to make them brush well, and usually once something is gummed like that, it doesn't dip very well. So you wind up brushing, and you probably want to put 3 coats on and cross hatch it, and then decorate on top of that, and see how that goes.
How much gum do you add to it, let's say, like 100 grams?
I have no idea because I don't gum.
Okay.
I've tried adding gum to the colors that I mix up, and probably less than 1/8 of a teaspoon will make this seriously gum. It doesn't take more than a couple of drops. Drops? Yeah. Teaspoon drops.
Well, because sometimes you get a red glaze that just really doesn't go on very well, so you just drop it until it does. Very funny.
If you get carried away and you over-gum, it can cause your glaze to kind of slide around and be streaky. And the other thing is if you got seriously carried away, you can cause crawling from the gum burning out. But you have to get really pretty carried away for that to happen. So there are other options, though, for decorating like this. I mentioned if you can decorate on Shino. This little piece has little craters on it. It's because I was getting gassing from my clay body, not because the glaze was bad. So this is Amico Black Satin commercial glaze with the Mallorca colors on top of it. And it gives this kind of midnight in Mallorca garden. And they have some other matte glazed colors that work really well. There's a terracotta color that's really nice. And that's been fun to decorate